The first thing he was aware of was the strength. It was a foreign sensation, a ghost limb he hadn't realized was missing until its phantom ache began to solidify back into bone and sinew. For 3 weeks, Darius had been a creature of shadow and silk sheets, the potent venom of an assassin's blade rendering him as fragile as spun glass. His ancient power, a roaring inferno that had laid waste to armies and humbled gods, had been reduced to a guttering candle flame, shivering against the encroaching dark. Now the fire was returning. It coiled in his belly, a welcome, familiar heat spreading through his veins, pushing out the memory of the ice that had threatened to claim him. He could feel the solid weight of his own body again, the press of the mattress against his back no longer an anchor dragging him down, but a foundation from which he might soon rise. He opened his eyes. The perpetual twilight of the royal bedchamber greeted him, the heavy velvet curtains drawn against the sun's intrusion. Dust motes danced in the single, defiant spear of light that pierced the gloom, each one a tiny, glittering world. For weeks, that single beam had been a mockery, a reminder of a world outside that continued without him. Today, it was a promise. He turned his head, a simple movement that a week ago would have cost him a day's worth of energy. Elena was beside him, as she always was. She slept. Her dark hair was a spill of ink against the white linen of her pillow, a stark and beautiful contrast. Her face, usually so animated, so full of a life that had always fascinated him, was serene in repose. But it was a serenity that had begun to trouble him. It was too still. He watched the slow, shallow rise and fall of her chest, a rhythm that seemed to be slowing with each passing day. There were new shadows beneath her eyes, delicate bruises of lavender against her pale skin. She was always pale, his human rose, but this was different. This was a bloodless, almost translucent pallor, as if she were becoming a creature of moonlight and memory. A faint, metallic scent clung to the air around her, one he had first noticed days ago. He'd dismissed it then as a lingering trace of the physician's poultices or the bitter herbs of his own failed remedies. Now, with his senses sharpening back to their predatory keenness, he recognized it. It was the scent of old blood, faint and cloying. A frown creased his brow. He reached out, his fingers tracing the delicate line of her jaw. Her skin was cool. Not cold, not the alarming chill of the grave he knew so well, but cool, lacking the vibrant, sun-warmed heat that was so quintessentially her. His recovery had been deemed a miracle. The royal physicians, a coven of ancient, learned vampires and one surprisingly astute human practitioner, had exhausted their knowledge. They had spoken in hushed, grim tones of his fading life force, of the poison's unholy marriage to his immortal blood, creating a decay that even his regenerative abilities could not fight. They had prepared the court for the unthinkable, a world without its king. And then, just as despair had begun to settle like a shroud over the castle, the tide had turned. The fever broke, the pain receded, the strength, his formidable, world-shaping strength, began to seep back into him. They called it a miracle. He called it a mystery. And the heart of that mystery, he was beginning to suspect, lay sleeping beside him. As his power had waxed, hers had waned. While he felt life returning to his limbs, she seemed to recede from hers, retreating deeper into a fortress of slumber, from which she emerged less and less. When she was awake, her movements were languid, her smile a fragile, fleeting thing. She would sit with him, hold his hand, and listen as he spoke of plans for the future, of the vengeance he would wreak upon his enemies. But her eyes, those warm, chestnut eyes that had always met his with such fierce intelligence, were clouded, distant. She would drift off mid-sentence, her head drooping, her grip on his hand slackening. He had been patient at first. She was weary from her vigil, he told himself. She had spent weeks at his side, refusing food, refusing rest, a fierce guardian at the gates of his mortality. Of course she was exhausted, but the exhaustion had deepened into a profound lethargy that gratitude could no longer excuse. It felt like neglect. It felt like weakness. He was the king. He was returning to his full power, and he needed his queen beside him, vibrant, sharp, a partner in rule and in life. Instead, he had this sleeping doll, this pale, silent creature who offered nothing but the soft sound of her breathing in the dark. A cold knot of resentment tightened in his chest. It was an ugly, unfamiliar feeling, and he hated it. He hated the poison for making him weak, hated his enemies for their treachery, and now, a small, dark part of him was beginning to hate this frailty in her. He had chosen a human mate, a decision that had sent shockwaves through the ancient vampire courts. He had celebrated her fire, her resilience, her incandescent spirit. He had held her up as an example of the strength of mortals. Where was that strength now? When he needed it most, when he was ready to stand and reclaim his throne, she was fading. She was failing him. He pushed himself up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The floorboards were cool beneath his bare feet. He stood, testing his weight, and a thrill shot through him. He was steady. He was strong. He looked back at the bed, at the woman who was meant to be his equal, lost in a sea of indifferent sleep. The scent of stale blood was stronger, now that he was standing over her. It seemed to be emanating from the very pores of her skin. Disquiet warred with his burgeoning anger. What was wrong with her? Why wouldn't she wake up and be the woman he needed her to be? The woman he had fallen in love with. The silence of the room offered no answers, only the soft, maddening rhythm of her breath, a sound that was beginning to sound less like life and more like an ending. He turned away from the bed, his jaw tight, and walked toward the sliver of light from the window, feeling the chill of the stone floor seep into him, a coldness that had nothing to do with the morning and everything to do with the woman in his bed. 6 days now. 6 days since he had first stood on his own 2 feet, and with each passing day his strength returned in a torrent, a flood of ancient power that made the very stones of the castle hum. He could feel the thrum of life in the walls, hear the heartbeats of the guards in the corridors, taste the lingering emotions, fear, loyalty, anxiety, in the air. The world was coming alive to him again, a symphony of sensory detail he had been deaf to for weeks. And in the center of this vibrant, returning world was a profound and unsettling silence. Elena. He tried to draw her out of it. That first morning he had thrown back the heavy curtains himself, his muscles protesting only slightly, and let the full force of the morning sun, a thing he could now tolerate for short periods, a gift of his unique lineage, flood the room. He had expected her to stir, to shield her eyes and complain with the playful groan he adored. She did not move. The light washed over her pale face, making her skin look even more like porcelain, fragile and cold. She slept on, oblivious. Later that day, he had the royal chefs prepare her favorite meal, a rich broth of wild game, warm bread studded with rosemary and rock salt, and a small bowl of winter berries preserved in honey. He carried the tray to their chambers himself, a gesture that sent a ripple of astonishment through the castle staff. He set it on the bedside table and gently shook her shoulder. "Elena," he had murmured, his voice softer than he intended. "Wake up. You must eat." Her eyelids fluttered. It was a monumental effort, he could see that. She blinked slowly, her gaze unfocused, as if she were looking at him from the bottom of a deep well. "Darius?" Her voice was a thread of sound, thin and frayed. "I'm here," he smiled, a genuine expression of relief. "I brought you something. You've grown too thin." He dipped a spoon into the broth and held it to her lips. She took a sip, then another, her movements listless. After the third, she turned her head away, her eyes closing again. I'm tired, she whispered, her words slurring slightly. Just need to sleep a little longer. And just like that, she was gone again, sinking back into the depths, leaving him sitting there with a cooling bowl of soup and a growing sense of frustration. His patience, a notoriously shallow well to begin with, was evaporating. He was the king. His near death had thrown the kingdom into turmoil. Alliances were fraying at the edges, old rivalries were stirring, and his enemies, the ones who had orchestrated the poisoning, were still out there, hiding in the shadows. He needed to project an image of absolute strength and unity. He needed his queen at his side, a visible symbol of their unshakable power. Every day she remained sequestered in their chambers, lost to this inexplicable stupor, was a day the whispers in the court grew louder. They questioned her fitness, her stamina. They called her the sleeping queen, a fragile human bauble unable to withstand the pressures of their world. And every whisper felt like a direct challenge to his own authority, a mockery of his choice. He began to spend more time away from the bedchamber, immersing himself in the affairs of the court. He held audiences, met with his generals, and issued decrees with a renewed ferocity, as if to make up for his absence. He worked until the false dawn, fueled by his returning power and a cold, simmering anger. But no matter how much he accomplished, he would return to their chambers to find the same static, silent scene. Elena, asleep. The servants would report that she had woken for a few moments, had taken a few sips of water or a bite of toast, before succumbing to weariness once more. He started to see her sleep not as a symptom of illness, but as a choice, a refusal, an act of passive defiance. It was an irrational thought, and a part of him knew it, but the fear and humiliation of his own weakness were still too fresh. He had been helpless, and she had watched him. Now that he was strong again, was she deliberately retreating, denying him the partnership he craved? The idea took root in the dark soil of his pride and began to grow, twisting his love into something sharp and ugly. He began to speak to her while she slept, the words he couldn't bring himself to say to her face. "Do you know what they're saying about you?" He'd murmur into the quiet of the room, standing over her still form. "They say I made a mistake, that a human has no place on the throne. Are you trying to prove them right?" Her only answer was the steady, whisper-soft sound of her breathing. It infuriated him. One night, he returned to find her awake. She was sitting up in bed, staring at the tapestry on the opposite wall, a depiction of his first great victory. Her eyes were hollow. She looked insubstantial, as if a strong gust of wind could scatter her. "You're awake," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. She turned to look at him, a slow, heavy movement of her head. "I am." "For how long?" The question was an accusation. "Will you grace us with your presence for a full hour this time? Or will the effort of conversation prove too strenuous?" A flicker of pain crossed her features, so quick he almost missed it. "Darius, I don't feel well." "You never feel well," he snapped, unable to stop the torrent of resentment. "I was dying, Elena. I fought my way back from the brink. I clawed my way out of the grave itself. And all you can do is sleep. The kingdom needs its queen. I need my queen, and you give me nothing. You do nothing." He saw the tears well in her eyes, crystalline and perfect, before she turned her face away, hiding them from him. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the pillow. "I am so tired." "Tired," he scoffed, the word tasting like poison on his tongue. He did not go to her. He did not comfort her. He stripped off his formal tunic and stalked to the other side of the vast bed, lying down with his back to her, creating a chasm of icy silence between them. He lay there, rigid and furious, listening to the sound of her quiet, broken breaths until they evened out once more into the maddeningly steady rhythm of sleep. He stared into the darkness, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest, and wondered when, precisely, his love had curdled into contempt. The pressure from the court became a palpable thing, a weight in the air of every room he entered. Lord Valerius, his oldest and most pragmatic adviser, a vampire whose face seemed permanently etched with disapproving lines, was the first to give it voice. He approached Darius in the library, a cavernous space where the scent of aging paper and beeswax was thick enough to taste. Darius was poring over maps, tracing the borders of the renegade territories where he suspected his enemies had taken refuge. "Your Majesty," Valerius began, his voice a low, respectful rumble that nonetheless set Darius's teeth on edge. "The Council of Elders has requested another audience." "Regarding what?" Darius didn't look up from the map. "I have already laid out my strategy for rooting out the assassins. Their counsel is noted, but my decision is final." "It is not about the assassins, my king." There was a delicate pause. "It is about the queen." Darius's hand stilled. He slowly raised his head, his silver eyes locking onto Valerius's. "Speak plainly, my lord. I have little patience for courtly games today." Valerius inclined his head, unflustered. "There is concern. Her Majesty's continued indisposition has not gone unnoticed. The spring coronation is approaching. The rites require the king and queen to preside together. It is a vital display of the throne's stability, a symbol of our strength to our allies and our enemies alike." He let the unspoken implication hang in the air. "And your queen is a symbol of weakness." "The queen is recovering from the strain of my illness," Darius said, the voice dangerously low. "Her loyalty and vigil were exemplary. She is resting." "Of course, your Majesty," Valerius said, his tone smooth as polished marble. "No one questions her loyalty. They question her constitution. We are an ancient race, Darius. We require a monarch who can endure. The burdens of the crown are heavy, perhaps too heavy for a mortal frame." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, striking the raw, festering wound of Darius's own fears. He had defended Elena, his choice, against this very prejudice for years. He had vaunted her human resilience, her fire. Now, her listlessness was making a liar of him. The court saw exactly what he saw: a pale, sleeping woman, seemingly broken by the first real trial of her reign. "Her constitution is my concern, not the council's," Darius bit out. "Tell them the queen will be ready." Valerius gave a slight bow, but his eyes held a flicker of pity that enraged Darius more than any open defiance. "As you command." The advisor's words echoed in his mind long after he had gone. They question her constitution. The phrase became a litany of his own frustration. He had fought so hard for her place here, for them. He had defied centuries of tradition to bind himself to a human. In return, he had expected her to rise to the occasion, to prove them all wrong with her strength. Instead, she was proving them right. That night, he found her not in bed, but slumped in a chair by the cold hearth, a book fallen from her lap onto the floor. Her head was lolled to one side, her mouth slightly agape. A thin trickle of drool had escaped the corner of her lips, a small human imperfection that, instead of endearing her to him, filled him with a sudden, sharp disgust. This was his queen? This exhausted, slack-jawed creature? He picked up the book. It was a history of the kingdom, one she had been studying voraciously when they first met, eager to understand his world. Now it lay forgotten at her feet. He looked from the book to her face, and the anger that had been simmering for days finally boiled over. It was a cold fury, all the more potent for its quietness. This was not grief. This was not exhaustion. This was an abdication. She was giving up. On her duties, on her position, on him. He felt the chasm between them widen into an impassable gorge. On one side stood a king, vibrant with power, ready to defend his realm and his life. On the other, a woman who could not even be bothered to stay awake. The love he felt for her was still there, a deep and aching bedrock, but it was buried now beneath layers of disappointment, resentment, and a profound, terrible shame. Shame for her weakness, and shame for his own contempt. He left her there, sleeping in the chair, and went to the balcony. The night air was bitingly cold, but he didn't feel it. He stared out at the sleeping city below, a sprawling kingdom of shadow and light that was his to protect. He had never felt more powerful, and he had never felt more alone. The queen who was supposed to stand with him against the world was lost in a world of her own, a world of dreams he could not enter. And he was beginning to believe she had no desire to leave it. The weight of the crown, he thought with a bitter twist of his lips, was his to bear alone. And it was a weight that was rapidly becoming unbearable. The confrontation, when it came, was not a storm of shouting and shattered porcelain. It was colder, sharper, and far more cruel. It happened in the late afternoon, a time of day when the light slanted through the high arched windows, illuminating the dust in and the air and lending a false warmth to the stone chamber. Elena was awake, for once. She was dressed, not in her usual simple gowns, but in a formal velvet robe of deep emerald, the color of the royal house. Her hair had been brushed and pinned up, though a few weary strands had already escaped to frame her face. She had made an effort. He could see it. A month ago, the sight would have filled him with love. Today, it only fueled his irritation. It was too little, too late. She was standing by the window, looking down into the courtyard. He watched her for a moment from the doorway, her silhouette framed against the light. She looked ethereal, breakable, a queen made of glass. "So, you've decided to rejoin the living," he said. His voice cut through the quiet room, devoid of warmth. She turned slowly, her hand still resting on the cold stone of the window frame, as if for support. "I wanted to see the sun," she said, her voice soft and husky from disuse. "I felt a little stronger today." Stronger? The word was a dry, dismissive sound. Strong enough to stand? To wear a gown? A commendable achievement for a queen. Perhaps tomorrow you'll manage to walk the length of the corridor. The color that had been so absent from her cheeks flared for a moment, a faint, painful pink. "Darius, please, don't." "Don't what, Elena?" he asked, walking toward her, his steps slow and deliberate, the sound of his boots on the stone floor like the striking of a clock, counting down the final seconds of their piece. "Don't state the obvious? Don't observe that while I have been fighting to reclaim my life and my kingdom, my wife has been sleeping through her reign? I haven't been, haven't you?" He stopped before her, forcing her to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. He looked down at her, at the dark circles under her eyes, at the hollows in her cheeks, and felt a vicious satisfaction in her visible frailty. It confirmed everything he had been thinking. "You are asleep more than you are awake. When you are awake, you are a ghost, a phantom drifting through these rooms. You eat nothing. You say nothing. You do nothing. The court calls you the sleeping queen. Do you have any idea how that reflects on me?" Tears welled in her eyes, those beautiful, expressive eyes that were now just pools of hurt. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I try to stay awake. I try to be present. But the weariness, it's like a tide, it just pulls me under." "It's called laziness, Elena," he said, and the words were like stones, heavy and brutal. He heard them leave his mouth and felt a distant, detached part of himself recoil in horror, but the anger was a stronger force, a current carrying him forward. "It's called weakness. I chose a human for her fire, for her spirit. I told them all you were stronger than any of them. I defended you. And you are a monumental disappointment. You are unfit to be queen." Each word landed like a physical blow. He saw it in the way she flinched, the way the last vestiges of color drained from her face, leaving it a stark, waxy white. Her hand flew to her chest, gripping the emerald velvet of her robe as if to hold herself together. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She just stared at him, her expression one of utter, shattering disbelief. He had expected tears, arguments, pleas. He had not expected this absolute, silent devastation. "You are a liability," he pressed on, the cruelty of venom he couldn't seem to stop. "A fragile thing I must now carry. My enemies tried to kill me with poison. It seems my wife will finish the job with her apathy." That was the final blow. The light in her eyes went out. It was as if he had reached into her chest and snuffed out her soul. Her breath hitched in a raw, broken sob. Her knees, hidden beneath the heavy gown, gave way. She didn't faint. She collapsed. It was a dead weight, a marionette with its strings cut, a heavy, final fall to the cold stone floor. The sound of her body hitting the ground was sickeningly loud in the sudden, ringing silence. For a long moment, Darius just stood there, staring down at her crumpled form. The emerald velvet was pooled around her like a spilled jewel. Her dark hair had come undone, fanning out across the pale gray stone. She was utterly still. The anger, so hot and righteous only moments before, vanished, instantly replaced by a disorienting, icy dread. What had he done? The silence screamed at him. He had wanted to rouse her, to shock her out of her lethargy. He had not wanted this. This terrible, broken stillness. Her name was a strangled cry in his throat, but he couldn't force it out. He could only stare at the ruin he had made, the echo of his own voice still hanging in the air, damning him. Unfit to be queen. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing. He stared down at Elena's still form, a knot of ice forming in the pit of his stomach. His rage had evaporated as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a foul, ashen residue of regret. He had wanted to provoke a reaction, any reaction, to break through the fog of her apathy. He had not intended to break her. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, his boots scuffing on the stone. He knelt beside her, his own knees cracking in protest. "Elena?" he said, his voice a rough, uncertain thing. He reached out a trembling hand and touched her cheek. It was cold, not cool, as it had been for weeks, but cold. A deep, alarming chill that felt nothing like sleep. Panic, sharp and real, pierced through the fog of his shock. He gathered her into his arms. She was terrifyingly limp, a dead weight. Her head lolled back against his shoulder, her face as white and still as a marble effigy. He stood, lifting her with an ease that belied her human form. She felt weightless, hollowed out. He carried her to the bed and laid her down gently upon the silken coverlet. Her emerald robe was stark against the cream-colored sheets. He smoothed her hair back from her forehead, his fingers shaking. Her skin was clammy. Her breathing, when he leaned in close to listen, was terrifyingly shallow. A mere flutter in her chest, a moth beating its wings against a window pane, soon to be still. "Guards!" he roared, the sound tearing from his throat, raw with a fear he hadn't felt since the poison first entered his veins. "Fetch the physician, now!" His voice, imbued with his power and his terror, echoed through the royal wing. Footsteps thundered in the corridor, and the door was thrown open by two of his personal guard, their faces pale with alarm. "Your Majesty?" "Physician Lyra," he commanded, his voice shaking with a fury that was now directed entirely at himself. "Bring her. Tell her the Queen has collapsed. Run!" The guards vanished, their urgency a testament to the command in his voice. He was left alone again with Elena and the suffocating silence. He paced the length of the room, a caged predator, running a hand through his hair again and again. His own words played back in his mind, a torturous loop. Laziness, weakness, a monumental disappointment. unfit to be queen. Every syllable was a fresh twist of the knife in his own gut. How could he have said those things? How could he have looked at her, so obviously unwell, and seen only failure? The pride, the arrogance, the bruised ego that had fueled his anger now seemed like the most contemptible of sins. He had been so consumed with his own recovery, his own strength, his own needs as a king, that he had failed to see the truth right in front of him. She wasn't lazy. She was sick. She was fading away before his very eyes, and he had berated her for it. He had kicked her while she was down, and then stood over her and called her weak for falling. The self-loathing that washed over him was a physical force, making him nauseous. He stopped his pacing and went back to the bed. He sat on the edge, taking her small, cold hand in his. It was like holding the hand of a statue. There was no response, no pressure, no sign of the vibrant woman who lived within that form. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her cold knuckles. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the still, silent room. "Elena, I am so sorry." The words felt pathetic, inadequate. An apology couldn't undo the damage, couldn't put the light back in her eyes or the warmth back in her skin. He waited. Every second stretched into an eternity. He could hear the frantic activity in the castle, the sounds of running feet, of hushed, urgent voices. The news was spreading. The sleeping queen had fallen. He closed his eyes, a wave of despair washing over him. If she died, if his words were the last thing she ever heard, the thought was unbearable. He would not survive it. His immortality would become not a gift, but an eternal, deserved damnation, an endless expanse of time in which to remember his own cruelty. He tightened his grip on her hand, as if he could anchor her to the world of the living through sheer force of will. He held on, waiting for the physician, waiting for a judgment he knew, with chilling certainty, he richly deserved. The doors to the chamber opened, not with a crash, but with a controlled, urgent swing. Physician Lyra entered, her face a mask of professional calm that did little to hide the storm in her dark eyes. She was a human, one of the few who served in the highest echelons of the vampire court, her position earned through a formidable intellect and a will that could stare down immortals. She carried a leather satchel of instruments and remedies, and her movements were efficient, wasting no time on ceremony. 2 vampire acolytes followed her, carrying additional supplies. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice clipped, her customary deference replaced by a stark authority. "Step aside." Darius moved without protest, relinquishing his place at the bedside and retreating to the foot of the bed, feeling like a useless, hulking obstruction. He watched as Lyra immediately went to work. She placed her fingers on Elena's wrist, then on her neck, her brow furrowed in concentration. She lifted one of Elena's eyelids, peering at the pupil with a small, focused beam of light from a crystal she produced from her pocket. She listened to Elena's chest with a strange, trumpet-shaped device. Her expression grew more grim with each passing moment. "Acolytes, prepare a blood-warming infusion. Use the kaolin root, double strength," she ordered without looking up. "And bring the scrying bowl. I need to see the state of her lifelight." The acolytes hurried to obey, their movements silent and swift. Lyra turned her sharp gaze on Darius. What happened? The question was not an inquiry, it was an interrogation. "We were arguing," Darius said, the words tasting like ash. "I said some things." She collapsed. Lyra's eyes narrowed. "What things, Your Majesty?" He flinched. To repeat the words aloud now felt like another act of violence. "I was angry. I accused her of being lazy, unfit." He couldn't meet her gaze. He stared at a thread on the bedspread, his shame a physical weight pressing down on his shoulders. A sound escaped Lyra's lips, a soft, sharp hiss of disbelief and contempt. "You fool," she breathed, the words barely audible, but carrying the force of a thunderclap in the tense silence. "You magnificent, blind fool." Darius's head snapped up. His pride stung despite his guilt. "Physician!" "No," she cut him off, her voice ringing with an anger she no longer bothered to conceal. She turned back to Elena, gently drawing a small, silver lancet from her bag. She pricked the tip of Elena's finger. A single, sluggish drop of blood welled up. It was dark, almost black, and shockingly thick. Lyra cursed under her breath. "Did you ever once stop to wonder about your miraculous recovery?" she demanded, her back still to him. "Did it never occur to you to question why, after all my knowledge and all the power of the Coven's healers failed, you suddenly began to mend at an impossible rate?" Darius stared, his mind racing, trying to make sense of her words. "I thought it was my own strength returning." Lyra let out a short, bitter laugh. "Your strength? Your Majesty, your life force was poisoned, corrupted at its very source. It was guttering out. It could no more reignite itself than a drowned man could learn to breathe water. You were dying, and you would be dead, were it not for her." She gestured with the lancet toward the still form on the bed. One of the acolytes returned with a shallow silver bowl filled with clear water. Lyra let the single drop of Elena's dark blood fall into it. The water did not cloud or turn red. Instead, the drop of blood seemed to dissolve into threads of smoky blackness, swirling like dying embers before vanishing completely. Lyra stared into the bowl, her face ashen. "What is it?" Darius demanded, his voice tight with dread. "What does that mean?" Lyra finally turned to face him fully. Her eyes were blazing with a cold, righteous fury. "It means her blood is nearly spent. It holds almost no life force of its own. It is an empty vessel." "I don't understand," Darius said, though a terrible, impossible suspicion was beginning to dawn in the deepest corners of his mind, connecting her pallor, her sleep, the scent of blood, his recovery. "Of course you don't," Lyra said, her voice laced with pity and scorn. "You were too busy admiring your own returning power to see the cost. She has been using blood magic, Your Majesty, a forbidden, ancient human art, the kind that requires the ultimate sacrifice." She took a step toward him, her small frame radiating an intensity that made him feel like the lesser being. "Every night, for the past 3 weeks, while you slept, she has been performing a ritual of transference. She has been siphoning off her own life force, her vitality, her energy, her very essence, and weaving it into your blood. She has been pouring her life into you, drop by precious drop, to burn away the poison and mend what was broken." The world tilted on its axis. The floor seemed to fall away beneath his feet. He could hear a roaring in his ears, like the sea. Every cruel word, every resentful thought, every moment of his anger rose up to condemn him. Her exhaustion, her constant sleep, her paleness. It wasn't apathy. It was the price for his life. Her laziness, Lyra continued, her voice relentless, hammering the nails into his coffin of guilt, was her body shutting down after giving you everything it had. Her sleep was a desperate attempt to gather the barest scraps of energy to give you the next night. She wasn't failing you, you arrogant child. She was dying for you. And you, in your magnificent pride, you called her a disappointment. You stood there, brimming with the very life she was gifting you, and you broke her with it. Darius staggered back, his hand flying to his chest, as if he could feel Elena's stolen life force thrumming there. A stolen, damning pulse. He looked at Elena, truly looked at her, and saw not a failed queen, but a warrior brought low on a battlefield he hadn't even known existed. He saw the ultimate act of love, the most profound sacrifice. And he had repaid it with contempt. The horror of it was a physical thing, a clawing, tearing beast in his throat, choking him. He had not just been cruel, he had been monstrous. The physician's words hung in the air, each one a shard of glass embedding itself in Darius's heart. He could not breathe. The strength that had filled him with such pride now felt like a vile poison, a thief's bounty. It was not his. It was hers. Every steady beat of his heart was a beat stolen from her. Every deep breath he took was air she could no longer draw. The very life thrumming in his veins was a testament to his own monstrous, unseeing selfishness. He looked at Elena, lying so still on the bed, and his vision blurred. The image of her collapse, the sound of her body hitting the unforgiving stone, replayed in his mind with horrifying clarity. He saw the shattered disbelief in her eyes, the way the light had simply gone out. He had done that. His words, sharpened by his own ignorant pride, had been the final blow. The magic may have been draining her body, but he had crushed her spirit. What can be done? He finally managed to choke out, his voice a raw, broken whisper. He looked at Lyra, his kingly authority stripped away, leaving only a desperate, terrified male. You must save her. Lyra's expression was hard, unforgiving. The damage is profound. The transference ritual is designed to be a one-way street. Life force, once given, cannot simply be recalled. She has given so much that her own essence is frayed, her spirit's anchor to her body slipping. Your words may have severed the last thread. The finality in her tone was like a physical blow. Darius felt his knees weaken. No, he said, shaking his head in denial. No, there must be a way. Magic for magic. A life for a life. His eyes, wild with panic, darted around the room before landing on his own hand, on the dark blue veins visible beneath the skin. His blood. His immortal, powerful blood. It was the source of his life, a river of ancient magic and unparalleled vitality. A vampire's blood could heal, could enthrall, could transform. Could it give back what had been taken? My blood, he said, a frantic hope dawning in his eyes. Give her my blood. Lyra stared at him, her expression shifting from anger to a flicker of surprise, then to cautious consideration. The king's blood is a potent thing, she said slowly. To a mortal, it can be a cure, or it can be a cataclysm. Her body is impossibly weak. The shock of your power, so pure and undiluted, could burn her out from the inside, a candle flame put to a dry leaf. I don't care about the risk, Darius snarled, striding toward the bed, a man possessed. The alternative is not a risk. It is a certainty. I will not let her die. He reached the bedside and without hesitation, without waiting for Lyra's consent, he bit into his own wrist. The skin parted easily, and dark, rich blood, almost black in the dim light, welled up, smelling of ancient earth, power, and the cold of the grave. It was the essence of his immortality, the antithesis of the warm, vibrant life she had poured into him. He knelt beside Elena, lifting her head with an infinite, trembling gentleness he had not known he possessed. He pressed his bleeding wrist to her pale, cold lips. Elena, he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. Please, drink. Please come back to me. Take it all. It's yours. It has always been yours. The blood beaded on her lips, refusing to enter. She was too far gone, her body's unconscious reflexes stilled. Panic seized him again. He could not fail. He would not. He let his blood drip onto her tongue, forcing her mouth open slightly. He watched, his entire being focused on that single, desperate act, praying to gods he hadn't believed in for centuries. He prayed for a swallow, a flicker of life, any sign at all. He felt Lyra's presence behind him. Gently, Your Majesty, she murmured, her voice softer now, the physician taking over from the accuser. Do not flood her system, a few drops at a time. He followed her instruction, his desperation tempered by her caution. He let the drops fall, one by one, a slow, sacred litany against the silence. And then, he saw it. A tiny, convulsive movement in her throat. A swallow. It was so faint, he might have imagined it. He let another drop fall. Another swallow, this one more definite. A flicker of an eyelash. A sigh so soft it was barely a sound, like the rustle of a single dry leaf. A sob of pure, unadulterated relief tore itself from his chest. It was a raw, ugly sound, the sound of a king breaking, of a heart shattering and reforming all in the same instant. Tears he had not shed in over 1,000 years tracked hot paths down his face, falling onto her pale cheeks, mingling with his blood on her lips. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall, a baptism of his grief and his shame. He was not a king in that moment. He was just a man, weeping over the woman he loved, the woman he had almost destroyed, begging the darkness not to take her. He pressed his forehead to hers, the cold of her skin a stark reminder of how close he had come to losing everything, and he continued to let his life flow into her, a desperate, whispered promise with every single drop. Time dissolved into a blur of fear and hope. Darius remained kneeling by the bed, a statue of penitence, his wrist a perpetual fountain offering up his own essence. The room was silent, save for the soft sounds of Lyra and her acolytes moving about, monitoring Elena's state with their strange instruments and whispered incantations. Darius noticed none of it. His entire world had contracted to the space of this bed, to the pale face of his queen, to the terrifyingly slow return of life. With every drop of his immortal blood she swallowed, he felt a corresponding drain in himself. It was not the sickening weakness of the poison, but a clean, hollowing emptiness, a willing sacrifice. He welcomed it. He would have drained himself to a husk for her, given her every last vestige of his power if it would bring her back. It was his penance, a small and insufficient price to pay for his monstrous cruelty. He watched for changes with an intensity that was a physical ache. After an hour, he saw the first true sign. A faint touch of pink, delicate as a watercolor wash, bloomed on her lips, chasing away the awful, bloodless white. Another hour, and the same fragile color crept into her cheeks, a shy dawn breaking over a winter landscape. Her breathing deepened, the shallow flutters smoothing out into a slow, steady rhythm that was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He wept without shame, his tears dripping onto the back of the hand he held clasped in his own. He thought of his words to her, a monumental disappointment. The memory was a fresh stab of agony. She was monumental, yes, but in her courage, in the ferocious, self-immolating power of her love. He was the disappointment. He, the ancient, powerful king, had been undone not by an assassin's blade, but by his own blind, pathetic pride. He had seen a slight to his ego where he should have seen a sacrifice of the soul. "I will make it right," he whispered to her, his voice hoarse. "I swear on my immortal life, Elena. I will spend the rest of eternity making this right. Every day I will earn your forgiveness. Every day I will show you that I see you. I see you." Lyra approached him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your Majesty, that is enough for now. Her system is accepting it, but it is still a shock. We must let her body assimilate your gift. Rest." He looked up at the physician, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "Will she—" He couldn't finish the question. Lyra's expression was no longer hard. It was filled with a weary compassion. "Her lifelight is returning. It is faint, but it is steady. You have anchored her, Your Majesty. The rest is up to her." He nodded, a jerky, grateful movement, and finally drew his wrist away. The wound, deprived of his will to keep it open, sealed itself instantly, leaving behind only a thin white line that would be gone by morning. He refused to leave the bedside. He dismissed the acolytes, but asked Lyra to remain, and she took up a quiet vigil in a chair near the hearth. Darius sat on the edge of the bed, never letting go of Elena's hand. He held it between both of his, trying to pour his warmth, his strength, his remorse into her through his touch alone. He watched her sleep, but this was a different kind of sleep. It was not the terrifying, death-like stupor of before. This was a true, healing rest. The tension in her brow had eased. The pinched line of her mouth had softened. She looked peaceful. He traced the delicate veins on the back of her hand with his thumb, marveling at the fragility and the ferocity of this mortal woman who had saved him and whom he had so nearly destroyed. The hours passed. The false dawn came and went, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft gray. He did not move. He simply watched and waited, his heart a raw, open wound. He catalogued every sin against her, his impatience, his resentment, his coldness, his brutal, unforgivable words. He held them up to the light and let them burn him. He knew that even if she recovered, even if she forgave him, he would never forgive himself. That scar he would carry forever. It would be his reminder, a reminder of the cost of pride and the immeasurable value of a love he had almost thrown away. As the true morning began to lighten the room, he felt a faint pressure against his palm. His head snapped up. He looked down at their joined hands. Her fingers, which had been so limp and unresponsive, had curled, ever so slightly, around his. His breath caught in his throat. He stared, unmoving, hardly daring to believe it. Then it happened again, a stronger, more definite squeeze. He looked at her face. Her eyelids were fluttering, no longer the heavy, unwilling movement of before, but the lighter motion of someone surfacing from a deep and restful dream. He held his breath. Slowly, agonizingly, her eyes opened. They were no longer clouded or distant. They were clear, the warm chestnut color he adored, and they were focused on his face. She blinked once, twice, a faint line of confusion creasing her brow. Her lips parted, and she spoke his name. It was not the thin, frayed whisper of before. It was a soft, breathy sound, but it was her voice. Darius. The sound of it broke him all over again. A choked sob escaped his lips, and he lowered his head, pressing his forehead to their joined hands, unable to speak, unable to do anything but feel the overwhelming, tidal wave of relief wash over him. She was back. He had not lost her. She was back. Elena's first sensation was of warmth, a deep, penetrating warmth that seemed to start in her hand and spread slowly through her limbs, chasing away a profound and terrible chill she hadn't even been aware of until it was gone. The second sensation was thirst, a dryness in her mouth and throat that felt ancient. The third was the solid, grounding pressure of a hand holding hers, a grip that was both strong and infinitely gentle. She opened her eyes. The familiar canopy of their bed came into focus, the intricate carvings of vines and stags seeming sharper than she remembered. Everything seemed sharper, the colors more vivid. She turned her head, a movement that felt blessedly easy, and saw him. Darius. He was sitting, on the edge of the bed, his head bowed over their joined hands. His shoulders were shaking. She could hear a sound, a rough, choked noise that she eventually identified with a sense of profound dislocation as a sob. Darius was weeping. In all the time she had known him, this powerful, ancient, seemingly unbreakable being, she had never seen him cry. Darius? She said again, her voice a little stronger this time. His head shot up. His face was a wreck of emotion. His silver eyes, usually so imperious and controlled, were red-rimmed and swimming with tears. There were tear tracks on his sculpted cheeks. He looked at her, and his expression was one of such raw, agonizing relief that it stole her breath. "Elena," he breathed, her name a prayer. "You're awake." She tried to sit up, a flicker of her old strength returning, but he was there at once, a hand on her shoulder, easing her back against the pillows. "Easy," he murmured, his voice thick and raw. "Don't try to move." He looked into her eyes, and she saw a universe of guilt, shame, and a desperate, overwhelming love that was so intense it was frightening. "I am sorry," he said, the words stumbling out of him, stripped of all his usual eloquence. "Elena, I am so, so sorry. For what I said, for what I did, for what I failed to see." The memories were hazy, like a half-remembered nightmare. The coldness in his voice, the accusation, the brutal words that had felt like physical blows. Unfit, a disappointment. The memory of the pain was sharp, a fresh wound. She remembered the floor rushing up to meet her, and then nothing. A deep, quiet darkness. "You were angry," she whispered, her throat tight. "I was a fool," he corrected, his voice cracking. "I was a blind, arrogant, selfish fool. I was drowning in my own pride, and I couldn't see that you were giving me the very air I was breathing." He lifted her hand and pressed it to his cheek. His skin was warm. "Lyra told me. She told me everything. The magic, the transference, what you were doing for me, every night." He closed his eyes, a fresh tear escaping and rolling down his cheek to wet her fingers. "You were saving my life, and I was cursing you for it. There are no words in any tongue, mortal or ancient, to describe the depth of my shame, or the depth of my gratitude." She stared at him, at this broken, humbled king, and the anger she should have felt, the resentment she had every right to, simply wasn't there. All she could feel was the bone-deep ache of their shared pain and a profound, weary tenderness. He hadn't understood. He had been afraid, his pride wounded by his own brush with mortality, and he had lashed out at the nearest, safest target, at her. It was a terrible, human thing to do. "You were dying," she said softly, finding her voice. I wouldn't let that happen." "You almost died yourself," he countered, his voice raw. He gestured to his own wrist. "I gave you my blood. It's what woke you. It's what brought you back." She could feel it now, a subtle thrum of power deep within her veins. A strange, resonant hum that felt both foreign and familiar. It was his essence, intertwined with hers. A circle closed. A gift returned. He leaned in closer, his silver eyes searching hers, pleading. "I know an apology is not enough. I know that words are meaningless after the ones I used against you. But I will spend the rest of my existence, however long that may be, earning your forgiveness. I will never again be so blind. I will never take your strength for granted. I will honor the sacrifice you made for me, for us, until the stars grow cold." His vow hung in the quiet room, solemn and absolute. This was not a king making a decree. This was a man baring his soul. He was offering her the one thing he had never truly given her before, his own vulnerability. He was placing his broken pride, his shame, his entire heart into her hands. She didn't need a grand gesture. She didn't need an eternity of atonement. She just needed him, the real him, the one hidden behind the crown and the power and the pride, the one who was looking at her now as if she were the only thing holding his world together. Slowly, she raised her free hand, the movement still feeling heavy and deliberate. She laid her palm against his tear-stained cheek. He flinched, as if expecting a blow, but then leaned into her touch, his eyes closing, a shudder racking his powerful frame. She did not need to say, "I forgive you." The words were too small for the chasm they had crossed. Instead, she simply held him, her touch a silent promise of a new beginning, a foundation built not on power or duty, but on the painful, terrifying, beautiful truth of what they had survived. The room was quiet, filled only with the soft light of a new day and the steady, resonant beat of two hearts that had finally learned to listen to each other.